Good morning, everybody. Welcome back to another Chatting with Wisdom. For those of you who don't know who I am, my name is Rollie Allaire. Gigudo Migunkwe is my spirit name, and I'm your host of Chatting with Wisdom. So, Chatting with Wisdom is a weekly interview series featuring amazing women. There are different ways that women are amazing, and we get to celebrate that. So I invite you to join me in my private Facebook group, Mind, Body, Heart, and Soul Connection. And you can also find a similar group on Telegram that I've been using for the last year to share positivity. So today I would like to welcome Jeanne. So Jeanne Andrus entered perimenopause the way most women do, without a clue. To make matters worse, her symptoms weren't the typical ones that alert women and their doctors to perimenopause. Hot flashes and irregular periods. Hers were depression and anger, feeling kicked out of her own life and without the basic information which might explain what was happening. She determined that she was not going to let whatever was going on defeat her. Thus began her journey of research and implementing a plan to reclaim health and creating wellness in her life, and it worked. But she wasn't done yet. After creating her own bliss, she turned to the business of helping other women do the same during their own menopause journey. Now she writes, talks, and coaches to help women rebalance their hormones, diminish their symptoms, and delight in their lives again. So welcome, Jeanne. How are you?
Hi, I'm great. How about you?
I'm wonderful, and I am still trying to adapt to my new space. We keep rearranging it and moving things around, and I'm going to close my window because the traffic seems really loud to me. So I'm going to guess it's probably loud to the rest of you.
Okay.
So tell me a little bit more about yourself while I close my window.
So I started out not knowing what was going on with me. I started out on my health journey with a couple of very loose ideas about what would get me back to feeling my best and maybe even losing some weight during that time of my life. And it worked. And I gotta say, I was lucky. I picked a plan that worked for what was going on underneath my particular symptoms. And over the next 3 or 4 years, I got myself really healthy. I started down a path of thinking about myself differently than I had when I was premenopausal. In other words, before my journey of change started. And it became a passion to really help women through this time of life, which can be an intense struggle because we come into it not knowing. We come into it with minimal information. I don't know too much about what happens to a woman in Canada, but I know what happens to most women in the US. They go to their doctor, their doctor says, "How are things going?" And that's what they say. I mean, they don't say, "Are your periods still regular?" or "Do you feel any changes?" They say, "How are things going?" And you say, "Okay." And they don't press any further. And even when you ask a question, here in the US, the amount of time they have to talk to you is so limited that you don't get the information you need. So, and even worse, even when you get the information you need from your gynecologist, there's so many symptoms that are outside of the realm of what the gynecologists usually deal with, that you wind up going from doctor to doctor trying to resolve symptoms, and it doesn't work because nobody takes a holistic viewpoint of what's happening to you, and nobody says, okay, let's start with the premise that the changes of menopause are doing all of this. No matter what it is, if we say, if we take the premise that menopause is at the start of it and either prove or disprove that, then we can get to really what's going on in women's lives. So that's what I do, is I help women sort of evaluate what's going on, assess it, make a hypothesis about what's going on, and then we go into fixing it, changing it, putting it back to the point that you feel good.
Well, and one of the things I really like the way that you're talking about that. And so, yes, in Canada is the same thing. So unless you have a doctor who has some experience or knows what it is, you start with your general practitioner because we get referred to, because the gynecologist falls under specialist for us. So we don't get to just see a gynecologist.
That's even worse than here. I hate that.
So we need to be referred. And especially where I live, we're up north. And so then our resources are even more limited as to what it is. So our wait lists are longer. We don't necessarily always have the same services. And I know that for me, I started menopause. So I was perimenopausal at 27 after I'd had my my last child. And so right after, like prior to that, like I was always like 100% regular. I never had any issues. It was everything always flowed normal. Like I knew exactly how it was going to go. I knew when it was coming, how it was coming, all those kinds of things. And after I'd had my last son, that was one of the things that things started changing, and they never got back to normal after I had him. And so they tried so the doctor had tried different kinds of birth control and a whole bunch of other things. But what I didn't realize and what I didn't know is that my mom was fully menopausal at the age of 40, because we don't talk about those things, right?
No, we don't.
Now I do. That's one of the things that I really encouraged a lot of conversation. But I didn't know that my mom was fully menopausal at 40, which meant that put me at that same bracket of chances are I would have had to be that I was going to be menopausal. And so, but really struggling with trying to figure out what was going on and what was happening and all these things. And so I had gone to see an old gynecologist. He was old school. He was that's who I got referred to see. And that was who we always got up in our area. So it was that's who I got. And so then I had seen him. He did all of the pelvic exams and did all the scopes and did all the things to find out what was going on. And he said, "Oh, your uterus is perfectly healthy." Okay, that doesn't change the problem. That doesn't change what it is that I'm going through. I don't know what it is that's happening. And he's like, "But you have a perfectly healthy uterus, so you don't have to worry about it." And I'm like, okay. So my cycle was crazy because I had 7 days out of the month that I was not having that I was not bleeding. And so for me, that was challenging because it was hey, this is crazy.
Absolutely.
And it's no, there's definitely something going on here. There's something it's not right. And so then my physician had been away. And so they have, and I don't know whether or not you guys have that in the US, but we have what's called locums. And so the locum had actually come in. It was a replacement doctor for our doctor when they were going to be away for a longer period of time. So, and it happened to be a female doctor. And our doctor's office was amazing at whenever it is. And for me, it doesn't matter whether I have a male doctor or female doctor, but whenever we would have somebody female come in and any women, they would say, okay, well, if you're due for your exam, they would actually schedule them in when the female locum was in, just to help some women feel comfortable. So that was really nice. And so, and for me, like I said, it really didn't make any difference to me. My doctor delivered both my kids, so I don't really care. And so, but so she had come in, and so I'm going for my exam, and she's like, oh, are you just starting? Or are you just finishing your cycle? And I said, I'm not. This is just normal. And she's like, no, it's not. And I said, well, that's what the gynecologist told me. He told me that everything was normal. She said, and then, and then she's like, yeah, he obviously doesn't have a uterus. So she's like, this is not normal. So then she had given me some different things to be able to try, which worked really well. And they worked for a longer period of time. But she referred me to a different gynecologist. She said, you're not going back to see this guy. I will make arrangements for you to see a different gynecologist. And I did. And he was amazing. He knew what it is that he was doing. He did tell me how perimenopausal worked, how our hormones worked, and how our hormones diminish as we get older. I didn't know that. I had absolutely no clue. And so I just thought that, and he said, so our hormones are based on how many eggs that we produce at puberty, and we don't produce eggs on an ongoing basis. We start off with a certain number of eggs, and that's all that we have. And then
you want to know something even funkier. Your eggs are actually, you are actually created when your mother is or the female part of you,
Yeah.
the ovum, is created when your mother is created in her mother's uterus.
I heard
So
that, and that is so
yeah,
cool, isn't
because
it?
we are created with all of the eggs that we will ever have. So it's not even at puberty. It's we are created with this certain number of eggs, and we lose a chunk of them before we even get to puberty. And then every month we lose a certain it's not a certain number. We lose a number of them every month, just sort of through attrition. And then during our cycle, we're actually bringing in more eggs than the one that we will eventually ovulate with. So we may be maturing 20 or 30 eggs, and when one matures and ovulates, the rest of them just sort of disappear.
Oh.
Okay. And
Cool.
it's the ovulation, it's the actual ovulation that breaks the surrounding of the egg. If you thought of it like a chicken egg, it would be the shell dissipates, and out of what's left over, which is called the corpus luteum, that creates the progesterone for the month. It also creates some of the estrogen. Some of the estrogen is actually created through the ovary in the first part of the month. So your estrogen, it has a double crest, and your progesterone has a single crest. Wait a minute, I'm backwards in this.
Yes, you are. I'm seeing you go the right direction. So if that helps you.
So I just don't want to go out of the picture. Anyway, so that what happens in menopause or in perimenopause is that the eggs that we have left, whatever we have left, which is still going to be several thousand, maybe as much as 10,000 when we start perimenopause, but these are the ones that hadn't been stimulated to begin to mature earlier in our lives. So, and this is why older pregnancies so often wind up with chromosomally abnormal children, because they're actually being stimulated by a rise in what's known as FSH, or follicle stimulating hormone. I'm getting really sciencey with you. But that follicle stimulating hormone rises up to stimulate those last few eggs to start to mature. And often that winds up with eggs that aren't as, I'm going to use the word robust, as the earlier ones. And that's one of the reasons that trisome babies happen, because these older ovum are not always the best ovum.
Okay.
They're not as healthy, and so we can miscarry more. We can have these birth defects that are genetically based or hormonally, chromosomally based. And I hate to say that, because we are moving towards getting pregnant later, but biologically, we are less likely to produce healthy children at that stage of life.
Okay.
That's just an interesting side note.
But and that really is interesting. But like we talk about like these hormones, like you were referring to like these hormones and how the hormones are different. And so, because I think that in your description, like in your bio, you actually talked about how it affected your mood, right? So like you didn't have like the irregular cycles. You didn't have, so for you, it showed up in mood.
Yeah, it absolutely. In fact, because follicle stimulating hormone was higher for me, I actually got very, very regular for about 3 or 4 years. And I was one of those people that, oh, guess what? I go to the bathroom and guess what? Oh, think I better see if I have a tampon in my purse.
Yep.
But literally, I never knew when my period was going to show up. And what happened to me was I got super regular because this follicle stimulating hormone was creating this frequent ovulation.
Mhm.
But when I talk about the hormones involved, progesterone and estrogen and follicle stimulating hormone, and there's one more called luteinizing hormone, which actually triggers the release of the egg, triggers ovulation. That's not the end of the story. And the reason what I say is, so nature is lazy, evolution is lazy, and if it can tie things that it needs for our bettered survival to something that's already there, it will do that. So a lot of things have gotten tied to estrogen and work better in the presence, particularly of estrogen, sometimes progesterone as well. But what this means is that every cell in our body is expecting that estrogen and progesterone.
Yeah.
So by diminishing those as we get older, lots and lots and lots and lots of things don't work as well. And it's not just our reproductive system. So our insulin doesn't work as well. Our metabolism doesn't work as well. Testosterone works better in a woman's body when the right amount of estrogen is there. Cortisol is actually modulated and changed by estrogen. And that's probably where a lot of my problems came from, because I was definitely a type A personality. I had a type A kind of job. I was constantly under pressure cooker. And because my estrogen wasn't working quite as well, depression and anger became sort of my go-tos, along with a low libido.
Okay.
That is definitely a thing. And part of that's a hard one to get your head around, because for me, I think a lot of the low libido was that the relationship wasn't a positive one either. So I had some issues with that. So, and that didn't help. But when I started researching this, and I put them in my book, this is the most recent book I've released, which is the second edition of I Just Want to Be Me Again, available on Amazon in Canada or the US or the UK or just about anywhere in the world. It's also available as an ebook. I've researched over 100 symptoms of menopause.
Okay.
And I put the book out, and I sent it out to some advanced readers. And one of the women who I chat with frequently on Facebook, yes, those memory blips are real. And they don't get worse. They don't get better as you get older. But she said to me, you didn't include, what is it? It's a form of psoriasis that affects our genital area.
Okay.
And I said, I didn't even know about that one. So I went out and I researched it. I can't remember the name of it offhand, but it's a form of psoriasis and sclerosis that affects our genital area and stiffens. And it literally causes lesions in that area. And I was like shocked, and it's rare. It's rare. I don't want to scare people, but it's rare, but it's true. And
but it's something to watch for, right? So like if you're not even aware of it. And that's the whole part of the whole conversation, and having conversations. Because if you're not even aware that that might be something that's going on, and like I know that doctors will sometimes do hormone tests. Well, it all depends on where your hormones are at that particular time of the month.
And
Right?
it also depends on, so I talked about cycles where you don't actually ovulate, where eggs start to get produced, but they fall apart basically before ovulation, and you don't create any progesterone. Well, if you go into your doctor and you have blood drawn there, you may see this rise in follicle stimulating hormone. You may see the progesterone level low. You might even see the estrogen level low. But a month, now it takes you 6 weeks to get an appointment with your gynecologist, and maybe more for you. I don't know. I mean, I can call my gynecologist and make an appointment. But so let's say it takes 6 weeks. So now you're at the end of your next cycle. You know, you're just before the beginning of your next cycle when they go to draw blood, and you had a regular ovulation. You had regular progesterone, your follicle stimulating hormone, maybe down a little bit. Your estrogen levels are normal. Maybe they're low normal, but they're doctors say, oh, that's normal. So they don't even register you as in perimenopause. And yet you're having all these weird symptoms. And you're like, or you're going to a doctor like your good old Joe, the family, Dr. Joe, the family doctor. He delivered all your babies. He's 106 years old. And when he went through medical school, what they told you was perimenopause was that time in which your periods are completely disappearing. So if you're not missing 2 or 3 periods, he's not even testing to see if you're in perimenopause. He's saying perimenopause is that period between your last period and the first anniversary, which is the menopause date. He's saying that's perimenopause. And first of all, he had 1 lecture on menopause when he went to med school. Even today's doctors, unless they are a gynecologist, likely did not have more than maybe 1 lecture on menopause. And a gynecologist who is a general practitioner, GYN OB, probably had no more than 1 class on it, maybe less. And even that probably concentrated more on breast cancer risks and uterine cancer risks and cervical cancer risks post-menopause. So they don't get this whole thing of what's going on. They don't get a real holistic viewpoint. And even functional medicine doctors, because they are so few of them and so widely based, a lot of them don't get it either. I live in the New Orleans area, and I think we have 1 specialist in menopause. And she's learned it the way I learned it, by researching it herself.
Yeah.
Realizing that, and she's got some things that, in terms of being able to prescribe hormones and test for hormones and things like that. But basically, I go in and I educate my doctors every time I go in about menopause. And that's kind of what we have to do.
And being able to have conversations, right? So like, I know that talking about our cycles is just so taboo. And I'm so thankful that there's like so much more conversations about our cycles and making them more normal. And like, it's not this great big huge secret. It is something that has been around since the dawn of time. It has, and until more recently, like it has been, it used to be celebrated, or at least it was in our culture. And so, and it was like, okay, yay, you've actually become a woman, and all those kinds of things that no longer happen. because it's like, oh my gosh, that's just so taboo. Like, hide in the corner, don't let anybody know that this is what it is that's going on. But we need to talk about like the moods and the changes, and like we've got all these things that happen that makes us have um different approaches, different ways that we look at it, and how we are able to approach it. And when we actually start talking about, like I said, like we didn't talk about it, so I didn't know that my mom was menopausal at the end of, like, fully menopausal at the age of 40. Like, how did I know that? Right? So like, how am I supposed to know that? Because you just don't talk about it. And so like, it is a conversation. And had I have had girls, and that would be conversations that I would have with my daughters, but I still have had those conversations with my sons. Like, people are like, you've had conversations about your menstrual cycle with your boys, and it's like, well, yeah, why not? They're going to be involved with somebody at some point that it's going to impact them. And so knowing what it is that's going on. And so when my boys were at that stage where girls were going through puberty, my boys knew that if you happen to see something, that a girl has blood on her pants or anything like that, like, this is what you can do to be able to help her feel comfortable. And so, and one of my sons ended up doing that. He gave her, one of the girls, his sweater and said, just so that you know, so that, and she was like, oh my God. She's like, that's okay, my mom's already talked to me about it. And so then she was able to go and look after herself and do the things that she needed to do. But it was something that he was aware of, because it wasn't something that we made a big secret. I was the only female in the house, and so it wasn't a big secret. And so same as like my husband would go and buy tampons or pads, and people would say, oh my God, you're going to buy those? And he's like, well, the girl with the cash knows that they're not for me. Right? They're obviously not mine.
So let me go back to one thing you said. And this is, so when we talk about menopause as a taboo, there's a lot of reasons in our culture. Maybe probably not so much in the culture that I take it you come from, which is Native culture.
Yes.
Yeah. Indigenous culture. So, but you said one thing that just is such a trigger phrase for me, and that is that we tell our girls that the weirdness of my collar is making me crazy. There we go.
Okay, I think I just no, that's the wrong side.
Wrong side. So we tell our girls when they reach puberty and have their first period, someone will invariably use the phrase, now you are a woman. So here we get to the other end of our lives and we lose our period, and so who are we? Are we women? Or
I never even thought about that.
Yeah, so that's one thing that kind of, it's a trigger phrase for me now when I hear it. It's like, no, you're a woman because you're a woman.
Yeah.
And your period doesn't really contribute to that. So we do reach an elder status, but here's how women have been demonized for menopause in at least the American culture. I'm sure this bleeds over into mainstream Canada. But and I tell it this way, when I was 3, my mother took me to the movies for the very first time. And this was back, I'm old, this was back when movies were a big deal. So we dressed up to go to the movies. And I remember wearing my best pink dress. And I remember going in and sitting down in the theater, and my legs were very short, so they stuck straight out. And the velvet of the seats was scratchy on the back of my legs. And we watched a couple of newsreels that were in black and white, which were sort of like big versions of my little 19-inch TV, because that was a big TV back then. And then the curtains closed. Believe it or not, the curtains actually closed, and then they opened again. And for the first time in my life, I saw a moving picture in color. And a girl came out and danced with the animals in the forest, and she sang. And I was just enchanted with this beautiful girl. And it was a cartoon, Snow White. The next scene, well, maybe not the next scene, but the next scene I remember, the beautiful, imperious queen walked in and she looked at her mirror and she said, "Mirror, mirror on the wall, who's the fairest of them all?" And her mirror replied, "You, my queen, have a beauty quite rare, but little Snow White is 1,000 times more fair." This was the first time she had heard that. She flew into a rage. She ran into her laboratory. She mixed a potion and put it in the apple. And then she mixed another potion and she drank it. And she turned into a hag. I contend this was our first, for most girls, that was our first view of menopause, even though they never said the word. They never said, you know, this was aging in America. Wasn't America, it was fairyland. But what happened was we reached the end of our beauty and we turned into a hag. And that hag wasn't a very nice human either. She poisoned the princess. Disney did that over and over and over to us. If you think about the Disney movies, the real classics, 101 Dalmatians, Little Mermaid, Cinderella, Sleeping Beauty, Snow White, half a dozen others, the villain was always this middle-aged woman who couldn't face her own fading out of youth and beauty.
Yep.
And that's what they taught us subconsciously about menopause. And then we see ourselves, we look in the mirror and our hair turns gray. We get the little crow's feet around our eyes and lips. Our skin isn't as soft. We age in all kinds of ways. Our body weight shifts. You know, we go from maybe having too much weight in our thighs and our hips, or even some weight in our thighs and our hips, and it shifts into our belly, and we just feel gross and disgusting, and we feel like hags. We feel like our life is almost over. And so we come into it, and then we have all these symptoms on top of that, and we feel horrible about ourselves. So a lot of what we need to do is work with this whole area of who are we and what is this about? So now I want to talk about the other side of that, because that's sort of how we wind up feeling horrible in perimenopause. Just add the symptoms and the self-esteem and the getting older and the messages in our head that we aren't women anymore. Here's our gift. So I call this Eve's gift. The Bible talks, and I'm not a big, religion doesn't play a huge part in what I do, but I go back to the idea that, you know, we're cursed to bring forth children in pain and suffering. Well, yeah, childbirth ain't that much fun. But here's the flip side of that. Estrogen and progesterone push us into being a more social person. They push us there because it's hard to raise children, especially if 10,000 years ago, when most of this developed, 10,000, 20,000, 40,000 years ago. It's hard to raise children by yourself. You need a community to do it. It's so true. It takes a village. And if you're not willing to, and if you aren't willing to work in cooperation with that village, then you wind up ostracized and you wind up having to deal with these children all by yourself. And quite frankly, you die and they die. If you're in a hunter-gatherer, a very primitive hunter-gatherer tribe, it's almost impossible to survive with that in that situation. You want to be able to attract a mate, or be congenial enough to the men of the tribe that you get your share of the hunting, and you want to be able to work with your sisters to create a community where the children are taken care of and the work gets done, even though some of you are always pregnant and some of you are always just giving birth. Make sense?
Yep.
So we hit menopause and our levels of estrogen and progesterone drop, and they stop stimulating areas of our brain that help us to be more extroverted, more community oriented. But the flip side of that is we get to take ourselves from the edge of our circle of awareness and put ourselves in the middle of it. And that means that we get to choose how we want to be as a part of the center of our lives. And that's the real gift in this, is that it shifts our awareness and helps us understand who we really want to be and can be at this time of our lives. So some of us still have young children. It's not going to stop us from being great moms, by the way. In fact, you can sometimes be a better mom because you're a little more objective. It's not going to stop us from being in the relationships we choose. It just allows us to see our own needs as important too.
Yeah.
And you see this all the time. If you hang out on Facebook, you'll see person after person discovering this, oh, wow, I don't have to be a people pleaser anymore. I should tell everybody. Well, 24-year-olds are being pushed by their bodies to be more people pleasing, more community oriented, more around making relationships work. And then you hit this point sometime in your 40s where you say, not me. I don't care what other people think about me, and I don't have to be a people pleaser anymore. So when I see that, what I see is women hitting a new stage of their lives.
And I love that. I love that shift, because that's one of the things that I do see that a lot, is that my younger clients are like always trying to make everybody else happy and doing all these things, while my older ones are saying, yeah, we don't do that anymore. We don't do that anymore, right? But that used to be who I was, and I love that point of things. So that's actually really interesting.
Yeah. And what fascinates me is how biology works below that to make that happen.
Yeah, it's really fascinating how, and I know that I find it fascinating. So some people are probably going to think like, oh my gosh, what a crazy conversation. But it really is something that we really need to have more awareness of. We really need to have more conversations about how all of these things shifts our bodies and what it is that's going on and how it is that impacts. And so the more that we have that conversation and the more that we can normalize this conversation, the easier it's going to be for women to be able to know what to do or how to do or when to seek help, and to be able to reach it, and just being able to learn to be themselves and being okay with it. And I love the analogy of like movies and how it always is portrayed as like that old crone and that kind of thing. So really interesting, because I never thought of that, right? So I never paid attention. And I know there's been lots of conversation about Disney and all the things that Disney has done and all those kinds of things. But I never correlated those two things together. And so that's actually really interesting how that part of it goes. And so I know there's lots of conversations about the new movie, and I can't think of what the name of it is, but something about the red panda.
Oh, the red panda thing. Yeah.
So there's lots of conversation about like how controversial that is. And it's like, okay, but like she's having conversations about her emotions and how things change and shift, and how she actually learns to be herself. And so I think it's a grand thing, whereas other people are like, oh my God, this is so taboo, and they're talking about periods to 6-year-olds, and like,
Oh,
we should be having those conversations, right?
well,
They're going to have a period, or they're going to be with somebody who has a period. Like, it's not
so
something that should be so secretive.
so we know, and in the US there's lots of stuff going on, and I don't know if this made it to Canada or not, but there was a young girl, and she is not by any means the only one, but she was 10 and she was 6 weeks pregnant.
Yes.
And so that means that she got her periods probably when she was 9. So
Yep.
when we're talking to 6-year-olds, we're not that far off.
Nope.
And so this is my soapbox about American food supply, and probably true for Canada as well, is that most of our dairy has bovine growth hormone in it. And so think about what that's doing to your child. Just saying.
Yep.
The fact that all our kids are taller and bigger and heavier and maturing much earlier, and
external hormones play a huge factor. And so, like, I know that for me, I am a meat eater, and so I know a lot of my friends kind of have been pulling away from that, but I am truly a meat eater, and so I try and find meat sources that have less that they don't add hormones to their stock, because that, and I know if I buy if I buy from a farmer, and I do really well, and then if I have to, like, my supply's getting a little lower and I have to run to the grocery store, things are shifted, like things shift for me. And I know that some people think, well, no, that's not really true. And it's like, it really is. Like, they are pumped full of hormones, pretty intense. And so I know that it makes a huge difference, and it does play a factor on our hormones.
Yeah,
And
I eat all my meat from all the meat we cook at home comes from Butcher Box, which is hormone free and grass fed, and free range chicken and all of that. So I feel like that's a really important thing for me. Let's see, what was it? Yeah. There was something else that I was going to say about that. But yes, it's so important to think, and all the work I do with my clients is from a perspective of health coaching. I'm not a medical practitioner. I cannot prescribe.
Mm-hmm.
So my goal is to find natural methods, changing foods, changing the way women relate to their exercise and their movement during the day, how people sleep, and how women sleep or don't sleep. By the way, just a little side note for there, I've identified 10 different ways women don't sleep during perimenopause and menopause, and it's all tied to different hormonal imbalances. It's one of my favorite evaluative tools, because how we don't sleep really tells us a lot about what's going on with our underlying hormones. So I work with those things. I work with a few supplements. I use a few herbals. I do use vitamins because our food supply isn't as robust as it once was. And it's all about health. And a lot of women come in talking about weight loss, wanting to lose some weight. And what I find is that when we get their hormones back in balance and their body's working correctly, then the weight starts to fall off, and they can actually diet and lose weight without the same struggle that they may have been going through for months and months and years and years through perimenopause. When that weight has shifted, the weight gain happens. They can't lose. The things they've done before don't work. Years ago, I was working with a woman who was a fitness instructor, and she said, and I'm in the gym in the morning, and I'm pumping iron before my class, and then I do my class, and then I do yoga, and then I do this. And she was she was in the gym about 4.5 hours a day. And it turns out that the majority of her issue was cortisol. And what happens when you pump your cortisol levels up is your body says, oh, we're in famine, because that's the only trigger that our bodies know for long-term stress
Mhm.
is famine. Because that's years and years of evolution have taught us that when, it's either immediate danger or it's long-term danger is famine.
Yeah.
So when we go into famine, our bodies turn off our thyroids. So our metabolism isn't working as well. It
Yeah.
says to insulin, take as much of that sugar that comes in and store it as fat, because sooner or later, we're not going to have enough calories in a day. And of course, Americans, at least, are eating way more calories than we need every day anyway. So now we're storing a whole lot of extra stuff. And at this time in our lives, it's all stored in the belly. And it's basically saying, get fatter, get fatter, get fatter. And the more you exercise, the fatter you get.
Yep.
And so what we had to do was take her and put her on a diet of her gym. And she was allowed to go to yoga as much as she wanted. She was allowed to teach her spin class, but I took her off of pumping iron for a while just to let her cortisol levels settle down. And so our hormones are behind almost everything that's happening. And that's why I work with women. And right now I'm going to give an offer to any listeners that we have right now to talk with me about what your hormones are doing. And join me. You can go to mg.menopause, menopause.guru, GURU/HR-opt-in. And I see that Rollie has just put that in our chat. And that is the place that you can go and take a quick, maybe it's not so quick, but 15 or so minutes, hormone assessment for yourself. And then you can schedule an appointment to talk with me about your results and tell me what's going on, what it may have missed, and what that really means for how you move forward in your life and pick and choose between all the thousands and thousands of options we have for getting healthy. So for some of you, it may be bringing those cortisol levels down. For others, it may be re-triggering your thyroid after you've kicked yourself into low metabolism with yo-yo dieting. For others, it may be that we need to deal with insulin resistance. And so for some others, it may be that you really need to think about some bioidentical hormone replacement because your body just isn't going to pick it up that quickly. Make sense?
Yep, absolutely. And so that's great for anybody who wants to be able to explore that further, because I think that's really important. And so thank you so much for sharing, and thanks so much for sharing your wisdom of your experiences. And like I said, it's easy when your cycle's kind of out of whack. But it's not so easy and actually that's not necessarily true, because I didn't have the best experience that way for most people, right? But being able to identify that there's some things and some shifts going on in our emotions that make a difference as well.
Yeah. So the book is available on Amazon.com or Amazon.ca.
And what is it called again?
It's called, because this is what we're screaming, I just want to be me again. That's what we want. All come into this feeling like we're not the same person. Mm-hmm. And so that was what I was screaming. My story's in here. How I found out what was going on with me and how it affected my life before I knew. And there's a secret. There's always a secret. You won't be exactly the same person you were before. You'll be
Yep.
better. I call it you 2.0.
I like that. I love that. And so I'm just sharing this on LinkedIn as well, just in case somebody's looking for it. Because I know that for me, it's always easy to grab it from the comments. So
Absolutely.
so I just put it in there. And for those of you who are catching this replay through through Spotify or through any of the podcasting sites, then you'll have to search it up. I'm sorry. Unless somebody else is so kind to add that to it when they actually get there. But yeah, so this is amazing. And so thank you again for having this conversation. Thank you again for having this real conversation about how we shift and giving me some different perspective. Because like I said, I never even thought about that whole point of becoming a woman, right? So like that was always something to celebrate, but it is.
And sure is something to celebrate.
and but it is something, but also in our culture, we also celebrate the other, right? So like it makes a difference that way, but I never paid attention to the words that I used with respect to that. So, so thank you.
You let me take one more minute here because you used another word that that has been terribly misused, and that is crone. And so crone actually it comes from the same root word as crown. So if you look back here, there's my crown. I keep that crown to remind me that this is truly the crowning of womanhood, is our ability to be the elder, the wise woman,
Yep.
the crown.
Yeah, beautiful.
The crown.
And in other cultures, that's also one of those higher rankings, right? So they don't call them, they don't refer to the women as as an elder, whereas we do in ours. We call them grandmothers, or that we call them grandfathers. But in other cultures, it is the crone, and that is the wise one. That is the one that has all the knowledge and is able to share all of that. So again, thank you so much, Jeanne, for being part of this conversation and sharing your wisdom today. And
thank you so much for having me. It's been so much fun.
And so for those of you who join me weekly, I will see you next week with another guest. So I'll talk to you soon. Bye for now.
Thanks.